Thank you all for being here, and congratulations to Megan for being elected a commissioner from Mid-Kentucky Presbytery. And thank you for your service to the church in the most unusual experience of General Assembly that we've ever had, and I sort of hope never have again. But I would normally have been there along with you and enjoying what makes General Assembly a lot of what it is, which is seeing people and both renewing old friendships and building new ones. And but I'm really grateful to you, Megan, for wanting to take the time to tell us all about this. So thank you.
You're very welcome. So I thought I would go a little bit through the how before we tackle the what, because believe it or not, the what was probably the least substantive part of this whole experience, which is not usually what happens at General Assembly. So as Cynthia mentioned, it was pretty much the most unusual General Assembly we've ever had. It all took place on Zoom, so that's the format that we're using right now. I left my name as it would be shown in the Zoom meeting, and so everyone had to type their name and then their role of all the many acronyms. So mine was TEC, which is Teaching Elder Commissioner. There are also ruling elder commissioners, young adult advisory delegates, mission advisory delegates, a whole slew of different acronyms, and then our presbytery. And they obviously wanted to make sure that they could see who was present, but they also utilized that to make sure that there was that there was diversity in the voices that we were hearing, the people that were being called on, the people that were getting to speak for or against different motions. They really wanted to make sure that all voices were being heard, which I said when I first came on that I sought recognition quite a few times to speak for or against whatever was happening, but I never actually got called on. And so that was kind of part of that, was in trying to make sure all voices were being heard. So how they had this set up was we had a Zoom meeting going. They had bought enough slots in a Zoom meeting for 1,000 people to be there. I think we were mostly around the 800 number of participants, but that doesn't really give an accurate number because downtown here in Louisville at the center, there were a number of people kind of all in the same room. And so you would frequently cut to someone in a mask that then had to like put a microphone right up to their face because they're all social distancing, but also being in the same room. So you basically had to have multiple screens set up. So you had to have your Zoom meeting going, and they asked that the commissioners all kept the video feed going so that they knew that it was actually us who was voting, so that they knew we were actively participating. They said they were closely monitoring everyone's video feed to make sure that things were happening appropriately. And there were some people whose video capabilities actually got cut because they were using that platform kind of as a moment of justice for whatever cause they wanted to, and they would hold up signs and then their video would be cut off. So we had to have our videos on the whole time, and then simultaneously going, we had the website that is PC Biz, which is our website where all of the business happens anyways, through General Assembly. They set up PC Biz drastically different than what it normally is. I've never actually been a voting commissioner, so I don't know what it's normally supposed to be like, but it's how they have it set up right now is every single thing happens in PC Biz. So as you open PC Biz, let me see actually if I can share my screen and show you what it looks like still. I don't know if they've changed it. No, they've changed it. Sorry, I can't show you. But so normally when you open PC Biz, it has all these buttons at the top now, and the buttons are seek recognition, speak in favor, speak against, make a motion, all of the different things that you would do on the floor of the assembly, you would press the button to make it happen. And that was incredible. The people who spent the amount of time building this website did an amazing job. The problem came in the amount of time that it takes to type things out if you're making an amendment or making a motion or something to that, and kind of the lag time that was experienced between the moderators who were leading the meeting and the participants who were trying to kind of do everything drastically and as quickly as possible. And so that led to a very slow assembly. It also unfortunately led to us having to continuously go back to revisit things that had already been voted on because people said I had technical difficulties or I wasn't recognized when I was in the queue. And to go back to old business means you have to have a 2/3 majority of the group saying, yes, we want to go back and revisit this. And so it was slightly problematic. But for an entirely online General Assembly meeting, for that to be the only thing that went wrong, I think is definitely something to celebrate. So I'm going to walk through kind of what happened. So we convened last Friday, so Friday the 19th, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And I'm not certain why the decision was made to start so late because we had lots of things to do during that time, including trying to elect co-moderators. But what actually happened was that the very first thing we had to do, which I mentioned in my minute for mission, was we had to suspend the standing rules that we have as a General Assembly and replace them with special rules. And the special rules were basically just allowing us to meet on Zoom. So they were things like all of the things that we had to do through PC Biz. It was allowing us to meet online. It was saying that there was only going to be one committee and that committee was going to be the Committee on Business Referral, which would recommend the items that we talked about this General Assembly versus next General Assembly. And that there would be no new business. There was all these new special rules that allowed us just to meet online. And that action now has to be ratified in the next General Assembly at 2022 and hopefully then reversed to take those, hopefully we will not be meeting in the same way, and so we'll have to take those special rules away and make sure that we go back to the normal General Assembly standing rules. And so normally as a commissioner you would be assigned to a committee and you would meet together as a committee throughout the week and then bring whatever your committee's business is to the floor of General Assembly. But in the special rules, we said there was only going to be one committee, and that committee was the Business Referral Committee that let us know what we were going to talk about at this General Assembly and what we were going to push to the next one. And so that committee got together and they had this criteria that basically said, if for deciding what we wanted to vote on. So they would say, if this piece of business, it basically said, we're only going to talk about critical business. And what that means is, if this piece of business doesn't come before the General Assembly, would it have legal implications or financial implications for the church? Would it leave a critically appointed leadership spot blank? Those kinds of decisions. And so what it meant is that we really only had about 25 overtures to talk about and a consent agenda, so maybe 30 total. And we ended up pushing hundreds of overtures to 25, the next General Assembly. Mostly because this, for all of the kind of setbacks that I talked about with the PC Biz, it just didn't allow for the kind of rich conversation that needs to happen at General Assembly in those committees and on the floor. This was a really obviously historic and great thing that it happened, but it just didn't allow us to do business as usual. And so there was a lot of things that folks wanted to discuss at this General Assembly. There are lots of overtures that were really great, like creating a committee to write a new confession to speak to what is happening in our times, and voting on a PCUSA-wide family leave policy, creating an advocacy committee for LGBTQ folks, voting to become a sanctuary denomination, stuff around fossil fuel divestment, treatment of refugees, gun violence, Syria, the Middle East, the Paris Agreement, mental health. I mean, it's all these things that we all really care about, but we just recognized that this was not the format that we could talk about it in. And the reason why that first night ended up going so long was because people were really frustrated by that decision, and they kept pulling things off of the agenda that we had pushed to 225 and saying, no, we really need to address this now. And almost every single one of those items that got pulled off was voted down. There were only two things that got pulled off of the 225 agenda and put back onto ours, and those were two overtures that had to do with the state of Native American churches. Mostly the rationale behind that was that these churches have been so neglected that there's a real urgent need for them to have more resources and more finances to be able to even utilize their buildings. And so we did approve adding some money and some support there, but that was the only item that got pulled back on. And almost every other item dealt with budgets or electing people to different positions. There were really only two items that had any kind of made any kind of larger statement. And that was one that, let me see if I can find the actual wording. So one is on responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the other is called On the Church in This Moment in History. And I will speak to those in just a little bit, but I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about what happened Friday night. So it took a long, long time for us to get to the point where we all felt comfortable with the agenda. And actually, it ended up coming back up multiple times of people wanting to revisit it over and over again. And I really think that speaks to us as a denomination of we feel a great need right now to do this work. And especially since so much of this is, talking about social justice, which is really at the heart of kind of who we are as a denomination. But this platform didn't allow for it. So every time it came back up, it got voted back down. And so by the time we finished business on Friday, it was already 11:30 Eastern time, and someone made the motion to push the moderator election to Saturday evening. And everyone on the West Coast was speaking against that, and everyone on the East Coast was clearly speaking for that. And I think it might have been Bill Marie who said, guys, the election process takes about 2 hours. So if we're starting that now at 11:30, 11:45, we're saying that for our East Coast folks, we are going late into the night. And so finally that did not move forward, and we did end up pushing the moderator election to Saturday night. But that actually brought up a really interesting point. That really started something that I thought was really fascinating in this process, which is that the people that were speaking against that were upset because this wasn't a normal time slot that we were slated to meet. We were told that our commitments would be Friday evening and then the next Friday and Saturday, so these last 2 days. And people were very upset that they were then called upon to meet the next day also. And so I think that's another detriment of this online meeting, was that people weren't fully present, physically present, obviously, but I think most people were doing, honestly, what I did a little bit of too, is like they still had their real lives and their real jobs happening around them, and they didn't fully take the whole week to be present and attending. And so that, I think, was a frustration of mine, especially as we got towards the end of it. I recognized that this process was exhausting, staring at multiple screens and, trying to do this work in this way. But I also felt that it was, we have been called to this, and we really should give it the time and the attention that it deserves. And so that was definitely a frustration of mine, that this platform somehow allowed us to think that, it was only bound to the times that they told us that we would be meeting. But we did end up pushing the co-moderator election. And so we gathered together on Saturday night, and we had 3 different co-moderator groups. So there was no one running just for one moderator. Everyone was in pairs. And the group that won is Greg Bentley, who is a pastor out of Huntsville, Alabama. He's a Black man, and Alona Street Stewart is a Native American woman from Minnesota. And they are fabulous. They won by a pretty large majority. We only had to vote once, and that's kind of unusual for General Assembly. So I think that speaks very highly to them. But the thing that I appreciated most about all of the folks running is that we had such diversity, kind of all over the place, as terms of, ethnicity, sexuality, just, we really just had so many different points highlighted, and kind of different platforms that they were running for. And there was one group that talked so much about kind of the need for technology in this day and age, and they were really hitting this technology platform hard because of coronavirus and needing to get technology into smaller churches so that they can work in this setting. And so it's just really fascinating, and very different, I think, from what questions would have come up otherwise, and what kind of platforms people would be running on if this were not kind of the time that we are in. But I really love our new co-moderators. They talked about in their process, and they have this image that is behind them. It was behind them the entire time. It's a hand painted image of a Sankofa bird, which comes from Ghana. And it's this image of a bird that is, its head is kind of turned around, reaching back onto its back. And I think I read that it's reaching like for a stone or an egg or something. But the idea and kind of the image of this Sankofa bird is the idea of kind of reaching back to the knowledge that we've gained in the past and really bringing it forward to make positive progress. And so they're talking about this as far as, they both have very diverse backgrounds, diverse history, and they're really bringing their experience to now and to how they see the future of the church going. But I also just love that image overall as a church, as we try to figure out what we are doing moving forward, being able to reach into our past and really kind of bring some of that experience forward as we go into very uncharted territory. I think it was a really beautiful image, and I love that they kept that image behind them on their screens. Zoom allowed for a very odd thing to happen, for people to have virtual backgrounds, for people to put up things that they cared about in their backgrounds. And so that was very odd. Mine was boring. It was this, but I thought it was kind of a cool thing that you don't normally get to have at GA. So then I guess I will go into talking a little bit about opening worship. So that was all we did on Saturday night. We had a worship service installing the new co-moderators. It was really beautiful. And then we didn't gather together again until the next Friday, a couple days ago. And we opened with worship. And the entire theme of this General Assembly was from lament to hope. And so the previous co-moderators preached, and we did have communion. And so they really preached on this theme of lamenting, and the idea that a lamenting soul is a hopeful soul, and that we don't know the path forward, but we create it by faith and by physically doing the work. And it was lovely. It was the first time that I had actually participated in communion online, since we're not doing that at Highland. So that was a interesting, odd experience. I forgot to buy grape juice, so I just ate grapes, but you know, such is life. So that then takes us into the business. And as I mentioned, there was not much of it. We had just a few overtures to deal with, and almost all of them were nominating people to different positions, approving the Presbyterian schools and like colleges and universities, and approving seminaries to serve communion. So there really wasn't a ton of business that was controversial. A few things happened that made it kind of noteworthy. And this actually started in the very first night, because San Francisco Theological Seminary has been bought by University of the Redlands, and they, on the very first night, asked if the president of the University of the Redlands could be seated as a corresponding member. And we had to vote on it as a whole, and it actually got denied. The state clerk spoke to it and basically said that, you know, through this sale, they are no longer technically a Presbyterian institution. And so they are not to be given a seat as a corresponding member. And it was difficult, and it actually kept coming back up over and over again, mostly because you had a number of San Francisco theological grads present, and they have such a heart for their school. And I don't actually know the details of all of this, the issue with the sale, but it seems like there's a lot of feelings surrounding it. And so that was something that kind of kept coming up over and over again. It came up again when we were confirming the seminaries to serve communion. Someone tried to make a motion and said, we need to put San Francisco back in there. We can't deny them the ability to serve communion. And the state clerk again had to come back on and say, this is completely out of our hands. Like, we are not telling them that they can't serve communion. We are just saying that it is someone else's responsibility to now handle all of that. And so it was interesting. And I think that's going to come back up at next time's General Assembly again. So that was definitely a point of noting. And the other thing, I'm going to share my screen and let you guys see the response of the COVID pandemic one. Oh, maybe I can't do that. Well, I think since we're recording, I can't actually share my screen, or else Rob has to give me permission to do that. Well, I can just kind of say what it says a little bit. It's a lovely overture that, oh, I'm the host now. Okay, now I will share my screen. So you guys can kind of read through it if you would like. It's on PC Biz, so this is showing you what the changes were the lines are things that were taken out, and the little brackets are the things that got added in. But I just think it's a really beautiful overture, just speaking to the difficulties that specific groups are having with the pandemic, and also saying that, you know, we will affirm and work to help in whatever ways that we can, that we will, you know, commit to continuous discernment on how to meet the social justice, economic, and spiritual challenges. And the one thing at the bottom that it actually does is sets aside October 25th, which is Reformation Sunday, as a day of prayer for responding to all of these challenges. So that is something that we will celebrate later this fall. But basically, you can just see that it's just kind of our response as a church to everything that has been happening in terms of coronavirus. And we can look at that a little bit longer if you want. This is the other one that kind of came up, and it has a lot of changes because a lot was added to it. This is the one that's called On the Church in This Moment in History. And a big thing that it did for the actual General Assembly is that it called, I'm trying to see where it's actually written. It called this piece to direct the co-moderators to facilitate a time of silent vigil for 8 minutes and 46 seconds as a symbolic representation and solidarity with our BIPOC siblings. So at the end of the General Assembly, before we had closing worship, we had that silent vigil for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, which was lovely and agonizing, and I think very appropriate. And so I really appreciated that. The other thing that this does is really supports the open letter of the Poor People's Campaign, which is kind of where we ended up directing our efforts as a General Assembly. Normally, we would do something in the city that we are in to kind of work, to really be present in that city, and to kind of not just be there utilizing their resources, but to give something back and to really kind of stand up for injustice. And since we were not in Baltimore, we were able to join the Poor People's Campaign Moral March, which was just like this, basically. It was an electronic version of a march that was happening in Washington, D.C. And it was really wonderful and powerful to be a part of it. It in no way replicates the actual physically being a part of something like that, but it was, for me, a way to kind of replicate some of that. And the other thing that we did is supported a organization called Youth Rising, which is an organization out of Baltimore that helps young adults start new businesses. And so that was where a lot of our money went when we took up offerings, and it was also one of the organizations that we are committing to kind of pray for and work with. I'm gonna stop sharing this, and if you want to look at it more later, I will gladly share it with you all. I'm sure you'll see it in other ways too. So that leads to the only other major thing that happened, which is the budget. Oh, well, the other great thing that did happen was we elected our stated clerk to serve for another 4 years. So J. Herbert Nelson is going to serve for another 4 years, and we are all thrilled because he's just fabulous and phenomenal, and we're so grateful that he even chose to serve another 4 years. And so the thing that he kept saying kind of over and over again, which I loved because it totally described this General Assembly and the time period that we're in, which is that we are learning to fly the plane as it is in the air. And so every time a question came up, he would say, so we are learning to fly the plane as it is in the air. And I just loved that because it feels so accurate. And so there was a lot of discussion with the budget as it refers to learning to fly it in the air. And part of it was that so as commissioners, we are elected until the next General Assembly. And so in theory, I'm an elected commissioner for 2 years. And the Assembly can decide to meet again if they choose. And that came up a number of times in the budget discussion because the budget is there, but we're not certain how things are going to go. And so multiple people said, why can't we reconvene again in a year or whatever and have this conversation again as we see what actually happens down the road. And the answer to that was, well, we can do that, but that will cost us another $200,000. And so obviously that was kind of shot down. And so the budget was approved and is kind of moving forward as it stands. And unfortunately and understandably, there's going to be a very massive cut to it. So this year, the budget was at about 94 million, and we approved for next year's to go down to 80 million. And then for 2022, I guess, to come up just a little bit to 83 million. But that's obviously massive. And it was mentioned that there's a PCUSA-wide travel ban for staff members through the rest of this year. So that has saved some money, thankfully. There's obviously saving the money on the General Assembly itself. Like $200,000 is a lot of money, obviously, but that's not what it normally costs to put on the giant General Assembly. So that's another place where we are saving money, which is good. But they are anticipating, like all of our churches are, that we're going to take a huge hit in giving. And they are actually expecting there to be about an increase in the churches who can't pay their per capita. They're actually expecting that 25% of churches won't be able to pay their per capita. And so that's a huge place where that giving deficit is going to incur. And so because of that, they did not increase the per capita amount. So it's still at the same $8.95. But that's kind of the only good thing that came out of the budget discussion. Somebody tried to make the amendment that in these budget cuts, we could not cut jobs of folks down at the center. And that got voted down for kind of obvious reasons, because we're kind of expecting that that's a big place where some of that funding is going to have to come from in those cuts, which is not good, obviously. So yeah, I don't really want to end it on a bad note, but those were kind of the major pieces that came out of this. I would love to hear from you guys what questions y'all have and what comments and concerns come up. And y'all are pretty much all on mute, so you might have to unmute yourselves.
Megan and Cynthia, what do you think our outlook is, for the next year and budget? And the second question, which is related that none of us know, is after, let's say next year we have a vaccine and that issue has been resolved, do you think that come July of next year or December of next year that we will have maintained or we will have lost net membership? Obviously, the second can't be answered, but what do you guess, you two?
I will speak a little bit to that, and Cynthia can definitely speak to it too. We've been told that kind of we're going to see bigger issues in 2021 than we will see in 2020. Mostly because a lot of this is going to impact more future giving than what folks are actually giving right now, as it affects their future finances a lot more. I am curious what it will do to membership. I think our church is in a really, really difficult position of about to be going into the time of an interim, because it's often the case that you lose membership during a transitional or interim period. And so to have that on top of the coronavirus, I do think it's a challenge. But I am very hopeful that we can work with the transitional pastor that comes in, that we can work through this entire process so that we don't lose membership. It is possible.
Well, I agree that I think overall in philanthropic giving that 2021 is going to be more challenging than 2020. That we're going to get through this year, and the question is going to be the uncertainty that all of us are going to feel about 2021, because there are just so many unknowns. That said, I must say I found myself in the middle of the General Assembly. If I had been a commissioner, if I'd even been a corresponding member, I think I would have urged the General Assembly to raise the per capita. I think keeping it the same is insane. Mm-hmm. We could afford to pay more in per capita. There's no question about that. Other people can't. Fine. They're not going to pay it anyway. But get the people who can to get on board.
Yeah,
for heaven's sake. So I think that's just, there's another way we could really save per capita, which is that we get rid of synods. Because we pay $25 worth of per capita, $8.48 of it goes to the General Assembly. The rest of it is going either to the presbytery or to the synod. And if you don't have that layer in between, you've got a portion of that per capita that can go away. Now that's really unpopular, and it's really unpopular in this particular synod, which is the synod that managed to get to vote down getting rid of synods 4 or 6 years ago. I can't remember which.
I think I was at that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was in my time. That was a while ago.
Pardon me?
That was in my time. That
was in your time.
Oh,
that's exactly right. That was
it comes up again and again.
It was Pittsburgh. Yeah. Yes, that's when it was. Anyway, so, there are some structural things that could happen. So I'm on the board of the Presbyterian Church, a corporation. We're the people who brought you that budget. And our conviction is that reduction in force is the very last item on a laundry list of ways to even deal with personnel. It's about item 12 in a list of suggestions. Mm-hmm. There's lots of stuff that can be done before you get to reducing jobs. I mean, at the moment, there's a whole ton of open jobs, and one of them is don't fill them. You're not laying off people, you're just not filling positions. So there's a lot we can do that is not going to hurt people that are actually working. And that's our absolute conviction of what we want to accomplish at this point in time. So the last comment I would make is that after I came here as the transitional pastor, the interim pastor, the job that I held for a year plus, attendance went up, not down. Giving went up, not down. Energy happened. I don't think you should imagine that that might not happen or continue the next time around.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I also think that there will, I have hope that there will be a renewed desire for church come the other side of this, that more people will want to connect in this way because we're so starved for connection. But I agree, Cynthia.
And just because we don't, the denomination did not raise the per capita does not mean that Highland Presbyterian Church cannot give more to the
Exactly.
PCUSA. So that might be
I will be
something
pushing hard for
session
that.
to discuss.
Yeah, for sure. Linda?
So Cynthia, this is the first year of having A Corp, and maybe you can explain what that is, but how did that affect the assembly and how business was brought in? I mean, I realize the business is all different, but how did that play out?
So as I alluded to in my sermon this morning, the nationwide denomination of Presbyterians was formed in 1789 in Philadelphia. 10 years later, in Pennsylvania, that nationwide denomination incorporated itself. It became a corporation, the Presbyterian Church USA, a corporation. So we've existed since 1799. And in various ways, there's been a board. 2 years ago, that corporate entity was separated out of the Presbyterian Mission Agency, which is what Linda Valentine led for 10, 12 years, 14?
9.
Pardon me?
9. 9
Oh,
years.
seemed like forever. Anyway, it was a separate board was set up to run the corporate entity. So our job is to oversee the functions of a corporate entity. So we manage the finance office, the legal office, the HR office, the computers, the building. That's what we do. And the IT. It's really boring. Except that it kind of, our goal is to keep the other agencies, the Presbyterian Mission Agency and the Office of the General Assembly, running. They are our client partners. I thought our two co-chairs did a really good job of explaining this.
Yeah.
And saying, we're here to help. It is not our job to set policy. It's not our job to get involved with mission direction. Our job is simply to make sure the rest of this functions. And there was zero complaint about that. And it seemed to be non-controversial. And that's our job, is to lie low and be helpful. And so a lot of the anxiety about how much comes out of shared mission or out of OGA into supporting these kinds of shared functions seems to have gone away.
Were you watching when your report came up?
I was.
They some random person who I felt didn't even have a lot of knowledge tried to increase the size of their board.
Oh, I know. Yes,
I was people or something.
I was watching that, and I was texting madly back and forth with our co-chairs saying, guys, you better get on this.
That was bizarre.
And I thought our chair was just wonderful, saying, look, if we're this big, we're as big as the other things. We don't want to be this big. We need to be contained.
So they have 14 board members, and someone tried to make an amendment to turn it into 18. And I don't even really know. She didn't even provide much rationale behind it. I didn't understand.
Megan, that came out, that was the idea of the Advisory Committee on the Constitution.
All right.
It was in the small print down at the bottom of the ACC's response to our recommendation to add one member.
Yeah.
And anyway, that's how that happened. And I won't say anything more about that. But anyway,
Uh,
it ended well.
it did. We voted against that.
Thank you. I would just like to say that at some point, I hope we will get the clean copy of the statement that you passed on the church in our time and racism issues, because you did a lot of work to that. It originally came out of the Office of the General Assembly, and then you and a whole lot of other people apparently spent a whole lot of time in between Friday a week ago and this last Friday recrafting that statement. And you did a lot of work. And a piece of that is a paragraph about owning our history as predecessor denominations around racism, around colonialism. I mean, it's wonderful that we're supporting our Native American ministries, but that whole thing is fraught with a very difficult history of the American history of Native American reservations. One of the schools that we own initially, Manal School, was one of the schools that refused to let children speak their indigenous languages. This too is a part of our history. That was repudiated many years ago, but you know, we've got a lot of unpacking of our own history to do, and it'll be good for us to do it.
Yeah. I really wanted to find a clean copy of it, and it just might not exist yet.
It doesn't yet. All we'll have for a while is this markup thing, but
I really wanted you all to see it though, because it does a lot of instructing on kind of how we can start moving forward and start doing some of this work to unpack it all. So I hope it will be well utilized.
So a typical General Assembly will have 150 or more overtures, and they will be on all manner of topics, from supporting certain kinds of ministry to, you know, against for-profit prisons, or a statement on the death penalty, or divestment, or how do we support the church in South Korea? I mean, just the whole gambit of issues, which is really fascinating that there are people that are so concerned about this whole range of, you know, so many different issues, who, you know, bring in overture to their presbytery, get it passed, get it to the General Assembly, then there are committee meetings, and you get people that are advocating for and against, and experts that are brought in. And I mean, it's just, it's an amazing array and depth. You know, Presbyterians think about things and research things and write about things deeply. It will be interesting to see, you know, if there will be so much pent up energy for these things 2 years from now, or whether it'll dissipate, because it's such a strange pause.
I agree. I think the thing that folks kept saying over and over again is, you know, just because this is going to the next General Assembly, it doesn't stop the work that we're doing, you know, on the local level. And we just kind of kept reiterating that over and over again, that this might be a time where we have to act more on the local church presbytery level, to do some of this work that desperately does need to get done and to get discussed. My concern is that GA 225 is going to have so much stuff if we're kicking all of this down to them, plus whatever else happens in the next 2 years. I think it's going to be a really large assembly, and it's going to be interesting. I mean, I assume that some of those overtures in the next 2 years will be rewritten or changed or maybe retracted. But it's going to be very fascinating to see what happens at the next one. Are there any other questions or comments that you guys have?
Well, thank you for sitting through all those hours of Zoom on our behalf.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I can't say I loved every minute of it, but it was nice to be part of history.
Do you feel like you found some new friends or colleagues?
No, I mean, a little bit, yeah. There were some people that I connected with through the process of kind of rewriting some of the work that I did. I think that's the biggest thing that was missing for me, was the connection, was the ability to talk in person. And that was kind of in me talking about some of the shortfalls, like that was a piece of it, because people couldn't make the connections to get the things out onto the floor that they wanted to. And I think there's a lot of hurt feelings over some of that.
And I think a lot of the questions that were asked that you and I may have found, kind of less than helpful are things that would have been ironed out in committees.
Absolutely.
If that piece of business had gone to a committee, it would have had the discussion, people have asked the question, gotten the answer, and it would have been over.
Yeah.
And it would never have happened on the floor.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of stuff that actually was asked in big plenary that never would have come up in plenary.
Yeah.
Because it would have been dealt with.
Yeah. Definitely.
And so many things, I guess the thing I found sad was so many things that would have been celebrated weren't celebrated.
Yeah.
So Presbyterian Publishing has a new publisher, David Dobson, and he would have been able, our member, David Dobson, he would have been able to be at the assembly. We would have introduced him. He would have spoken.
Yeah, he got pushed to the consent agenda.
I know, he was on the consent agenda.
That was the worst.
So was Kathy Lukert, who's the president of A-Corp, was on the consent agenda.
Yeah.
Jim Rissler, who's a member at Harvey Brown, was reconfirmed as the president of the Presbyterian Investment and Loan Program. That was on the consent agenda. And those kinds of, fortunately they gave David Crawford, the new president at McCormick Seminary, 1 minute.
But he gave you props in that minute. Listed you by name.
I was fortunately watching that moment. But, those milestones of leadership and are just so much of the part of the fabric of a community. And that didn't happen. And
yeah, I agree.
Megan,
Yes.
you mentioned the communion at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us whether you felt it was worth it, if it worked for you at all, and if so, could we try it here? What do you think?
So Cynthia and I have had this conversation a couple of times. I think the thing that worked about it was that we were all live. They were presiding over the elements in the same moment that we were watching it. It was all happening kind of in the same space, metaphorically. And so there was a sense of connection and kind of a spiritual sense to it that was more than just me eating grapes and pita bread. I mean, it did have that connection for me. I think the challenge that Highland faces is the pre-recorded piece that I don't know if it will feel the same if I'm watching it. And I know I'm watching it at the same time as other people, but I don't see them taking the elements. I don't actually feel as though I'm kind of together. So I'm not sure.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. When when we come back and there's a congregation and we are broadcasting, in
Right.
essence, the service, then that's maybe a different question.
Yeah.
But what we're doing now would be, I record on Thursday, you watch it on Sunday.
Right.
It is odd to watch someone like pouring the elements in their living room. That part was a little odd to me. But
At Bardstown Road Presbyterian, we've done some communions during our weekly broadcast, and ours is broadcast live. But it does lose a little something when you're sitting in your easy chair, watching the minister, and he's not seeing anybody else other than the couple of people that are there with him. But I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's not quite the same as being in your sanctuary and having communion.
Oh, yep. There's nothing like that.
turns out. Well,
Well,
Kevin or
Megan,
Cynthia,
thank
do you
you.
want to put in a plug for next week?
Sure. Speaking of interesting worship experiences, if you want a movie to think about preaching and worship in a completely different way than we experience it at Highland, The Apostle is the movie for you. Written, produced, directed, and starred in by Robert Duvall. It is a fascinating movie and very moving and very energizing. And John Foray, who loves this movie, I think as much or even more than I do, is going to talk about it. So if you want to join our movie discussion class next Sunday at 4:00, please do so.
Thank you. And thank all of you guys for showing up.
Oh, thank you, Megan. And bless you
Thank
for
you.
doing your work.